We all know the bands that were once awesome, but now just hobble along on the nostalgia treadmill, charging ever higher ticket prices for ever diminishing returns. If you don't mind paying half a month's salary for this kind of thing, then more power to you. This video isn't about them. It's about the bands and artists who actually did call it quits at the right time, or at least put a satisfying full stop on their career. And there's no better example to start off with than these guys. The Beatles initially had massively ambitious plans for what became their famous rooftop concert, an iconic moment in Beatles history, marking their final public performance. They'd talked about sailing to Libya with a boat full of fans and performing at an amphitheatre there, but in the end decided that was just too far to travel and too much hassle to organise, so they opted instead for an idea that involved the least amount of effort and travel possible, playing on the rooftop of their studio in Savile Row, London. So on a bitterly cold Thursday around lunchtime in January 1969, the Fabs played such a brilliant set that several of the cuts recorded live wound up on their album Let It Be. The concert was also featured in the film of the same name, and 50 years later became the centrepiece of the epic Peter Jackson documentary, Get Back. Seriously, go watch that doco, all 8 hours of it. It's really good. Anyway, the Beatles could have split up the afternoon of the rooftop concert and we'd still be talking about them the way we are today. Their legend was already established. Their place in history was already written. The Beatles were the #1 band of all time, and everybody knew it. So it's fascinating that despite having nothing left to prove and being embroiled in legal and personal issues, they went straight back into the studio and made Abbey Road, arguably their best album ever? And then they split up. That's why the Beatles are the textbook example of how to end your career on a high note. They were just so good, they couldn't help but make a masterpiece, even in the middle of breaking up. And then there's the album cover. Perhaps one of the most famous photographs in history. And it was another last-minute, low-effort alternative to the band's original idea of flying to Mount Everest to pose in front of it as their grand final gesture. Instead, they simply walked outside their recording studio and snapped this awesome photo, creating the perfect cover for the perfect album. Abbey Road was released, and 2 days later, the band did their last ever photo shoot. Here are John, Paul, George and Ringo together for the last time ever. Talk of a Beatles reunion did crop up throughout the 70s, and at times it even seemed like a possibility.
I don't know why the hell we'd do it, but it's possible. Would you like that to happen? If it happens, I'll enjoy it.
But after John Lennon's death in December 1980, the idea was put to rest forever. The surviving members did work on 3 posthumous tracks built around John's old demos, but these were one-off studio collaborations, not a reunion. And given that all 4 members' solo work often drifted into safer, more middle-of-the-road territory, they may have done themselves and the rest of the world a favour by leaving the Beatles' legacy untouched, frozen in time as the band that defined the 60s, changed culture and bowed out at the peak of their powers. Next up, Led Zeppelin broke up after the death of their drummer, John Bonham, who tragically succumbed to the all-too-common rock star demise of asphyxiation after alcohol-related aspiration, or choking on one's own vomit. Bonham's death, coming far too soon at just age 32, was also the death knell for his band, as Led Zeppelin vowed there was no band without their drummer. It's an honourable position, one that I believe genuinely came from the surviving members' love and respect for Bonham, and perhaps their foresight to realise that after 10 years of utter dominance in the rock scene, it was probably best to move on in their own separate directions and preserve the Zeppelin legacy, just as the Beatles had done the previous decade. And so they did. But Jimmy Page, Robert Plant and John Paul Jones would play as Led Zeppelin on 3 more occasions. First up was Live Aid in 1985. Zeppelin played a short and much maligned set. Some called it a car crash. Others were just happy to see them on stage again. But overall it was a disappointment. A pretty sloppy performance, not helped by the fact that sitting in for Bonham was not just 1 but 2 drummers, Tony Thompson and Phil Collins. Both great drummers, but why 2? Phil Collins' recollections more than 20 years after the fact are fairly blunt.
I remember arriving and going into the trailer and saying, "Hi guys, okay." So, and Jimmy Page said, "So how does it go, Stairway to Heaven, huh? How does it go?" So I said, "Well, I know this is where I come in and I go, da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum." He said, "No, No. And I thought, okay.
And there's no love lost from Jimmy Page either.
And it was said that Phil Collins knew the set. And so we went on in the end, and neither drummer knew any of the numbers at all.
Don't have a go at me. You guys were off, man. I was together. I knew my stuff.
3 years after Live Aid, they did try again with a reunion performance for Atlantic Records' 40th anniversary celebration. Zeppelin clearly had a close relationship and deep respect for their record company and its founder, Ahmet Ertegun. Once again, the performance was marred by sound issues and a less than stellar performance. Although it did mark the debut of John Bonham's son, Jason, as Zeppelin's fill-in drummer. After that, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant collaborated extensively, touring and releasing albums throughout the 90s. Page and Plant was Zeppelin in almost everything but name, but the elephant in the room was the glaring absence of John Paul Jones, who made no secret of his displeasure when the three surviving members did finally reunite for their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 1995.
Thank you, my friends, for finally remembering my phone number. Thank you. Bye-bye.
It took another 12 years for Jimmy Page, Robert Plant and John Paul Jones, along with Jason Bonham, to finally take the stage one last time as Led Zeppelin for a memorial show in honour of their friend Ahmet Ertegun at London's O2 Arena. 20 million people applied through a lottery system that delivered the 18,000 tickets to this one-off performance, making it quite possibly the most anticipated rock concert in history. And this time, they got it right. 6 weeks of rehearsals and focused effort to do justice to Zeppelin's legacy paid off. Even Robert Plant, the main holdout for the reunion until he finally relented, looked and sounded like a man with something to prove. The evening was a resounding success, a legit Zeppelin set, performed with passion and authenticity, leaving fans desperately wanting more, but at least knowing that finally a neat bow had been tied on the Zeppelin story. Page did try tirelessly to persuade Plant to take the show on the road, but Plant had other interests. Page even looked to give the singer's slot to someone else.
I got a call from Peter Mensch, who was managing Jimmy Page. He said, look, those guys are rehearsing. Would you like to go over and rehearse with them? I went into a studio, and the four of us played. It was,
Thankfully, good sense prevailed, and although the world may have been robbed of one final Zeppelin tour, not to mention Zeppelin robbing themselves of millions, their final bow was graceful and satisfying. Well played, Zeppelin. Alright, let's talk about these guys. When Roger Waters left Pink Floyd in 1985, he just assumed that would be it for the band. And it kind of was, for about as long as it took for his former bandmate David Gilmour to realise that any record he made going forward would probably sell a lot more with Pink Floyd written on the album cover. And so, the Gilmour-led Pink Floyd continued to make platinum albums and tour successfully around the world for the next decade, much to Waters' dismay. Waters lawyered up and pursued his former bandmates, aggressively trying to prevent them from using the name Pink Floyd, but he ultimately settled out of court, and instead just spent the next 15 years bad-mouthing them at every opportunity. But that didn't stop Floyd, whose Rogerless lineup seemed to carry on as if nothing had happened, with fans more than happy to pack out stadiums around the world and have their minds blown with lasers, dry ice, projections, and frankly, who cares who's up on stage, man? Check out that pig! Actually, Roger also tried to sue them for using the pig, which he claimed was his intellectual property. So Floyd just put a pair of balls on it, changing the character's identity. They did give Roger a nice credit though. And after every last ticket was sold and mind was blown, a truce was made in order for Pink Floyd, with Roger Waters in tow, to perform one final show as the penultimate act for Live 8, a charity concert organised by charity concert luminary and the guy who played Pink himself in The Wall, Bob Geldof.
I said, is that you, Gilmour? Yes. I said, you're going to do the concert? He goes, yes. All of you, yes. And I couldn't believe it, really.
For those who'd been following the Floyd drama, it was quite the sight to behold. Roger Waters up on stage with David Gilmour, Nick Mason and Richard Wright for one final performance. The same four guys who made a racket in the Pompeii Amphitheatre more than 30 years prior, and going on to release all those classic albums, back on stage together again. The rousing finale of Comfortably Numb was a huge moment for Floyd fans, and clearly for Roger himself, who seemed genuinely overcome with emotion. Gilmour slightly less so, though clearly willing to put aside any animosity for this event. It was an emotional and satisfying final bow from a truly great band, who played a 4-song set and rocked the dad jeans like the boomer legends they are. And with Rick Wright's passing in 2008, the performance became even more poignant. Gilmour and Waters even embarked on a short-lived post-reunion bromance, but in the end, everything went straight back to normal.
In February 2023, Polly Samson, the former lyricist for Pink Floyd and the wife of Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd, tweeted this: "Sadly, Roger Waters, you are anti-Semitic to your rotten core, also a Putin apologist and a lying, thieving, hypocritical, tax-avoiding, lip-syncing, misogynistic, sick with envy megalomaniac. Enough of your nonsense." A few hours later, David Gilmour retweeted this and commented, "Every word demonstrably true."
No comment.
Moving on. If you watched the official Queen biopic, Bohemian Rhapsody, you'd know the story of how Queen formed, how they overcame the odds and rose to the dizzying heights of rock and roll superstardom. And then the dramatic twist where they break up, then reunite for Live Aid, where Freddie informs his bandmates he's contracted HIV, but they go out anyway and give the performance of their career as the credits roll. Well, that all makes for a tight script, but it's mostly bollocks. And as much as you'll hear people defend this approach to storytelling as simply the prioritising of good filmmaking over facts, and the film is the highest grossing music biopic of all time, I actually think the real story is more interesting and emotionally impactful. Queen never broke up, and in the run-up to Live Aid, they were still producing massive hits and playing enormous shows, and performing in South Africa at the height of the boycotts, but like the film, we'll skip over that. Their Live Aid performance was a highlight of the event. The most memorable moment of the set, and probably of Live Aid itself, was when the band played Radio Gaga with all those unison hand claps. There was no breakup, and this was no reunion. This was just Queen doing their thing, another day in the office for one of the biggest live acts ever. The following year, Queen embarked on a European tour, which ended with an absolutely colossal show at Nebworth in front of 120,000 people. This would be the last ever concert with Freddie, and in terms of going out on top, this is the way it's done. Freddie's HIV diagnosis was revealed privately to the band the following year. And here's where the story gets really quite powerful. Knowing Freddie's days were numbered, Queen decided to put aside the touring and focus on writing and recording. Their 1989 album, The Miracle, contained some absolute bangers like the anthemic I Want It All, and the final track, Was It All Worth It? A career-affirming retrospective that I feel must have been intentional, a fitting swan song. Freddie was clearly conscious that this might be the end for him.
Yes, it was a worthwhile experience!
But that swan song didn't come for another 3 years, with The Show Must Go On, one of Queen's greatest songs. As with all of Freddie's vocals on the Innuendo album, these words were sung by a man grappling with the knowledge he had very little time left to live. And despite his body succumbing to the ravages of a horrible disease, the sound of his voice is mesmerising. Freddie Mercury died on November 24th, 1991, and Queen, the band, ended with class, dignity, and devastating finality. But there's an amazing postscript to this story. Queen, with Freddie, didn't stop recording after Innuendo. They went back into the studio. Freddie was exhausted from his illness, but with the help of a few vodka shots, he would prop himself up by the microphone and insist his bandmates provide him with lyrics to sing. The final track Freddie ever recorded was a song called Mother Love. Brian May would jot down a line, hand it over to Freddie, and he would sing it, building the track line by line, as much as Freddie could manage in his frail condition. These final words, recorded by Mercury, are a stunning testament to his formidable powers and one of the greatest final bows by any artist. In May's recollection, we got to the last verse and he said, "I'm not up to this. I need to go away and have a rest. I'll come back and finish it off."
Mama, please.
But Freddie was never able to come back. The final verse was sung by May, resulting in a song that's both haunting and beautiful. Righto, one more. When the Back to the Beginning concert was announced, a huge day-long festival in Birmingham, England, in honour of legendary metal pioneers Black Sabbath, featuring a who's who of metal, with one predictable exception. and concluding with sets from Ozzy Osbourne and the original Sabbath lineup, it all sounded a bit too good to be true. And sure enough, within days, cold water was being poured on the expectations of everyone who'd managed to secure tickets to the instantly sold-out event. Ozzy, deep into a multi-year battle with Parkinson's, made a statement. I'm not planning on doing a set with Black Sabbath, but I am doing little bits and pieces with them. I am doing what I can where I feel comfortable. So with expectations set low and many wondering if Ozzy would even be present, fans came from around the world to Birmingham, the birthplace of Black Sabbath and of heavy metal itself. This is where Black Sabbath, originally named Earth, formed in 1968, playing their first gig at the Crown Pub. And now, more than 55 years later, just a few miles away at Aston Villa Football Stadium, the heavy metal faithful were about to be treated to something extraordinary. With opening sets from Mastodon, Tool, Anthrax, Slayer, Guns N' Roses, Metallica, and numerous other guest performances from some of the biggest names in hard rock and metal, it was finally time for the penultimate act, Ozzy Osbourne. Sat in a throne, Ozzy surprised everyone by singing a live vocal. Yes, it was tweaked a little bit for the live stream. This was equal parts a celebration of the legacy of Ozzy Osbourne and an opportunity for Ozzy to share the love with his fans one last time from centre stage. And the best was yet to come. After a short break, the four working class fellas from Birmingham, Ozzy Osbourne, Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler and Bill Ward, finally back on the Sabbath drum stool after 22 years, delivered a 4-song set of solid gold Sabbath classics. When it was all over, the rock world was abuzz, lavishing glowing praise for how successful the event was. Thanks to ticket and live stream sales, the event raised millions for Birmingham Children's Hospital, Acorn Children's Hospice, and Cure Parkinson's. So let's hear it for heavy metal, always an outlier in mainstream culture, often mocked, often ridiculed, but actually one of the most enduring cultural movements in modern history, and capable of raising millions for worthy causes. Yes, heavy metal rules. 2 weeks later, Ozzy Osbourne was dead. He came from nothing and helped give the world heavy metal and reality television.
Give me the f***ing note!
But hey, it was a funny show. And that's how you end a career. Ozzy, your work is done, my friend. Rest in peace. You're still here? Okay, well, that Pink Floyd gig where Gilmour is playing the Black Strat, did you know it was auctioned off for charity along with his entire guitar collection, and this Strat was sold for nearly $4 million, making it the third most expensive guitar ever sold. I made a video about it and all the other most expensive guitars ever sold at auction. Go check it out. I'll see you there.